The valley lay in a rare stillness that afternoon. The air was heavy with the warmth of the late sun, its golden light pouring across endless fields of ripened wheat that swayed gently under the touch of a faint breeze. The farmers had paused their work after lunch, retreating into the shade of their cottages or resting beneath tall oak trees that bordered the farmland. For a while, the world seemed to breathe slowly, every sound softened, every movement unhurried. The sky stretched wide and cloudless, painted in a pale blue that promised nothing unusual. Birds perched silently on the wooden fences, their heads tucked under their wings, as though lulled into a dreamlike calm. Even the farm dogs had settled, sprawled lazily in the dust, their ears twitching only occasionally at the drone of cicadas that filled the valley with their monotonous song. But in the dim, cool shade of the barn, the quiet was broken. Rowan, the great chestnut horse who had served the family faithfully for years, refused to rest. His ears flicked nervously, swiveling as though to catch sounds no human could hear. His chest rose and fell quickly, nostrils flaring at scents that carried no meaning to the farmers outside. The smooth rhythm of the afternoon did not reach him. Instead, tension coiled in his muscles, urging him to move, to strike, to resist the calm that blanketed everything else. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and the faint musk of animals, yet Rowan's behavior filled the place with a restless energy. His hooves struck the dirt floor with a dull, repeated thud, scattering dust into the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the wooden slats. Each stomp was sharper than the last, echoing like a drumbeat of warning. His tail swished, not with the lazy swat of a horse chasing flies, but with agitation, slashing the air as if trying to chase away an invisible threat. Elias, the eldest of the farmers, noticed the disturbance first. From where he stood in the doorway, wiping his brow with a cloth, he narrowed his eyes at the sight of Rowan's pacing. Normally, the horse stood calm and patient after a meal, sometimes even lowering his head to doze. But today was different. His wide, dark eyes glistened with unease, and his movements carried a force that unsettled the old man's heart. "Strange fellow," Elias muttered under his breath, stepping forward. He placed a weathered hand on Rowan's mane, stroking slowly in hopes of soothing him. But the horse shuddered beneath his touch, ears flicking back, hooves continuing to pound the ground. It was not impatience, Elias realized, nor stubbornness. It was fear, raw, urgent fear, without a clear cause. Outside, the field still looked serene, the world unchanged. But inside the barn, in the restless stomping of a horse, a message was being written that no one yet understood. Rowan had never been a difficult horse. In truth, he was known throughout the valley as one of the most dependable animals a farmer could ask for. His chestnut coat gleamed under the sun, his strides were steady and sure, and his temperament so gentle that even the youngest children dared to ride him. Storms, barking dogs, sudden noises, none of it had ever rattled him. If anything, Rowan was the creature farmers leaned on when all else was uncertain. But that afternoon, the calm mask he always wore was gone. He pawed at the barn floor with a vigor that startled even the chickens roosting in the rafters. They flapped their wings in alarm, scattering bits of straw from above. Rowan snorted, a sharp sound that echoed off the wooden beams, and jerked his head from side to side as though trying to shake away an unseen shadow clinging to him. His muscles tensed beneath his sleek coat, and the steady rhythm of his breathing turned into short, rapid bursts. When Elias reappeared with a bucket of water, hoping a drink might calm him, the horse backed away, stamping so hard that dirt sprayed against the wooden walls. Elias frowned, puzzled. "Now what's gotten into you, old boy?" he murmured, setting the bucket down with care. His voice, usually enough to reassure, had no effect this time. Rowan's dark eyes were wide, the whites showing, a rare sight that made Elias's stomach twist. Outside, the other farmers began to take notice. Jonas, the youngest of them, leaned on his pitchfork, watching through the barn's open door. "He's acting wild," he called, half amused, half concerned. "Maybe he smells a fox or wolf nearby?" But Elias shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "This isn't the way a horse fears a predator. This is different." Rowan continued circling inside the barn, hooves drumming a relentless rhythm. He seemed unable to stop, as if some force urged him to keep moving, to keep warning. He tossed his head high, mane whipping like a banner in a storm, nostrils flaring with each heavy breath. Even when Elias tried to place a hand on his bridle, the animal resisted, jerking away violently. It was not anger. There was no malice in his movements, but a deep instinctive terror pressing him onward. The dogs outside began to bark without reason, ears pricked, tails stiff. The cows in the pasture shifted uneasily, nudging against each other. And yet, to human eyes, the valley remained peaceful. The soil underfoot felt solid, the air warm and still, the sky perfectly clear. Rowan alone carried the weight of knowledge. He was not simply restless, he was foretelling. His body, more sensitive than any man's instruments, felt the vibrations running through the bones of the earth. And though Elias could not name it, he began to sense it too. A prickle ran along his arms, the kind that comes when the air, before a storm, grows too heavy, too strange. The old farmer looked once more into Rowan's trembling eyes and whispered, "You're trying to tell us something, aren't you?" But no answer came, except the pounding of hooves, the restless cry of a creature who knew danger long before it arrived. The sound of Rowan's hooves soon carried beyond the barn walls, echoing across the valley like distant drums. Farmers working in the fields paused, squinting toward the source of the noise. The rhythm was steady, insistent, almost unnatural for an animal known for its calm obedience. A few men chuckled, thinking the horse had grown impatient for exercise, while others muttered with faint annoyance at the disruption of the afternoon peace. But Elias did not laugh. Standing close enough to feel the vibration of Rowan's hooves through the ground, he grew uneasy. The horse's eyes darted wildly, ears pinned back as if tracking sounds from beneath the soil. His muscles rippled with restless energy, and his tail whipped so violently that dust swirled in the shafts of light cutting through the barn slats. Elias had seen many moods in animals: fear, hunger, stubbornness. But this was something else entirely. It was as though Rowan's whole body had become an alarm bell that no one else could hear. He remembered his grandfather's voice, raspy with age, telling tales by the fireplace in the winters of long ago. "Animals know before we do, boy. Watch them closely. Before a storm, before a flood, even before the earth itself shifts. They feel what we cannot." At the time, Elias had thought of it as folklore, nothing more than the superstitions of an older generation. But now, watching Rowan's relentless stomping, the memory stirred uneasily in his mind. Jonas entered the barn, leaning casually against the doorway. "He's just restless," the young man said with a grin, brushing the dirt from his hands. "Too much energy after feeding. Maybe he needs a good run." Rowan suddenly let out a piercing neigh, a sound that silenced Jonas's amusement in an instant. The cry was sharp, frantic, like a warning shouted in a language no human could translate. He reared slightly, front hooves slamming down so hard that the ground seemed to tremble. Elias grabbed Jonas's arm, pulling him back. "This is no game," he snapped, his voice low and tight. Outside, the dogs' barking grew more frantic. Chickens scattered, feathers filling the air as they clucked in a wild frenzy. Even the cattle in the distant pasture stirred uneasily, bunching together and stamping their hooves. One by one, the farmers exchanged uncertain glances, their laughter fading into silence. And yet, the valley itself looked unchanged. Peaceful skies, golden fields, the hum of summer insects. No storm clouds gathered on the horizon, no predator prowled the borders. To the human eye, there was no danger. Only one creature saw differently. Rowan's whole body trembled, as if he carried inside him the echo of something deep and hidden. His hooves pounded not out of defiance but urgency, each strike of the earth a desperate plea. Listen, pay attention. Something is coming. But no matter how loudly his hooves rang, no matter how frantic his cries became, the farmers could not yet understand the message written in his restless movements. To them, he was just a horse behaving strangely. To Rowan, He was already racing against time. Unseen by the farmers above, deep below their feet, the earth was stirring. For centuries, the valley had rested on silent fractures, fault lines buried under layers of soil and stone, hidden from the eyes of those who worked the land. But that afternoon, the pressure that had been building for months, perhaps even years, began to shift. Rock pressed against rock, grinding in the darkness. Ancient forces twisted and strained, invisible yet unstoppable. The first movements were so subtle that no human could detect them. The ground beneath the barns and fields seemed as steady as ever. The wheat still bowed to the breeze, the oak trees still stood unmoving, and the air was heavy with warmth. To the farmers, nothing had changed. But Rowan felt it. His sensitive ears caught vibrations too deep for men to hear, faint murmurs of the earth groaning beneath its crust. His hooves struck the barn floor harder, each stomp timed to the rhythm of something only he could sense. The horse's body trembled with unease, his instincts screaming at him to flee. His breath came fast, fogging the warm air, his eyes wide and shining in the dim light. Every fiber of his being told him danger was near, though it wore no shape the human eye could see. Rowan neighed sharply, a sound that cracked like a whip in the still air. It startled Elias so badly that the old farmer dropped his cloth, staring at the animal as if he had gone mad. But Rowan was not mad. He was listening. Outside, the unease spread like ripples on a pond. The farm dogs refused to settle, running in circles with their tails stiff and their ears pinned back. They barked at nothing, their throats raw with alarm. The chickens flapped and scattered as if chased by shadows. Even the cattle in the far pasture grew restless, shifting from hoof to hoof, pressing close to one another with nervous lowing. And yet the valley remained outwardly calm. The sun still shone on golden fields. The cicadas still sang. To anyone who did not listen closely, it was the perfect picture of a summer afternoon. Elias, however, felt a prickle along his skin. He stood in the doorway of the barn, staring out at the strangely restless animals. The silence of the field seemed too deep, too unnatural, like a breath being held. His mind whispered of storms, but the sky was clear. He thought of predators, but there was no sign of wolves. He thought of his grandfather's words again. Animals know before we do. Rowan slammed his hooves once more into the dirt, sending up a cloud of dust that swirled in the sunbeams. The horse's entire body quivered as if the earth itself was humming beneath his skin. Elias swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. He still did not understand what Rowan sensed, but he knew one thing for certain. The horse was not wrong. Something was coming. Something hidden, silent, and immense. The valley held its breath, and Rowan alone could hear the warning carried through the bones of the world. At first, it was only a sound, a deep, low rumble that seemed to rise from the very belly of the earth. To the farmers in the valley, it resembled distant thunder rolling across unseen hills. Some looked toward the horizon, expecting to see storm clouds forming, but the sky was still painted in its flawless blue. Then, the ground began to move. It started with a shiver, so slight that one might have mistaken it for imagination. A jug resting on a windowsill rattled faintly. A wooden bucket tipped and rolled across the barn floor. The farmers paused, staring at one another in confusion. But within seconds, the tremor grew into a violent shaking. The very soil seemed to twist beneath their feet, and the peaceful valley was thrown into chaos. Rowan screamed, a piercing, desperate neigh that echoed louder than the quake itself. He reared high, front hooves lashing the air before crashing down with the force of panic. His entire body strained against the reins, desperate to escape the barn as dust rained from the rafters above. Barrels toppled and shattered, spilling grain across the floor. The walls groaned and cracked as if the building itself were alive and in pain. "Out! Everyone out!" Elias shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. He stumbled toward the doorway, waving his arms at the younger men frozen in shock. Away from the walls, to the open fields, Hurry! The dogs barked wildly, their voices nearly drowned out by the roar of the earth. Chickens burst from the coop in a flurry of feathers, squawking as they scattered. Cattle lowed in terror, pushing against each other until the fence posts leaned and snapped. The wheat fields rippled not with the breeze but with the undulation of the ground, waves rolling across the valley as though the land itself were a restless sea. The farmers stumbled as they ran, struggling to stay upright. Some clutched at fence posts, only to watch them topple under their grip. Pots and tools crashed inside the cottages, shattering into fragments. Roof tiles slid free, smashing onto the dirt paths. A crack split open along the edge of the road, dry soil crumbling into its new jagged wound. Through it all, Rowan's warning rang in their ears. His nervous stomping, his wild eyes, his piercing cry, it had all led to this. He had known before they did. He had felt the quake in the marrow of his bones long before the earth revealed its fury. The shaking lasted only moments, though it felt like hours. When at last the rumbling subsided, the silence that followed was deafening. Dust hung in the air like fog, drifting slowly over the battered barns and fields. The world was changed, fences broken, barrels split, walls cracked. But against all odds, the farmers had survived. And standing in the middle of the barn, sides heaving, nostrils flared, Rowan stood like a sentinel. His eyes burned with the fire of instinct fulfilled, as if to say, "I told you. I tried to warn you." When the tremors finally subsided, the valley was wrapped in an eerie silence. It was as if the earth itself, having unleashed its fury, was now holding its breath in exhaustion. The farmers stood scattered in the open fields, bent over and gasping, dust clinging to their clothes and sweat streaking their brows. Some clutched one another for balance, others stood frozen, their eyes darting back to the homes and barns that moments ago had seemed so steady, so eternal. The landscape was changed. Wooden fences that had marked boundaries for generations now lay twisted and broken. A water trough lay on its side, spilling its contents into the dry dirt. Roof tiles had slid from their places, forming jagged piles in the paths. Cracks scarred the soil like fresh wounds, running in crooked lines across the farmland. Though the valley had not collapsed entirely, the scars of the quake were unmistakable. And yet, miraculously, no one had been killed. No child was trapped. No farmer crushed beneath the timber. No beast lost in the panic. The barns had suffered, walls split and rafters shaken loose, but they still stood. The cottages were bruised but unbroken. The people of the valley had been spared, though shaken to their very core. All eyes slowly turned back to Rowan. The great chestnut horse stood in the center of the barn, sides heaving, his coat damp with sweat that glistened in the shafts of dusty sunlight. His hooves were planted firmly, muscles still tense as though he expected the earth to stir again at any moment. His ears twitched, his nostrils flared, and his eyes, dark and shining, seemed to hold a message that words could not carry. He had not calmed, not yet, but there was no mistaking the truth. Rowan had known. Elias, his body trembling not from age, but from the quake's violence, stepped closer. He laid his weathered hand against Rowan's quivering neck, feeling the heat and power of the animal's life beneath his palm. "You warned us," he whispered hoarsely. His voice cracked with a mix of gratitude and awe. "By the heavens, you knew before we did." The younger farmers gathered nearby, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and reverence. Jonas, who had laughed earlier, now stood pale and shaken, unable to meet Rowan's gaze. One of the older women crossed herself, whispering that it was God's hand that guided the beast. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their wide eyes fixed on the horse, as if he were no longer just an animal, but something greater, something closer to a guardian. Around them, the other animals were slowly settling. The dogs quieted, circling their masters and wagging their tails nervously. The chickens clucked softly as they returned to the safety of their coop. Even the cattle in the pasture stopped pressing against one another, lowering their heads to graze tentatively, though their ears still flicked in wariness. The valley was healing from its shock. But the humans knew, in the pit of their stomachs, that their survival had not been luck alone. Had they ignored the horse's warning completely? Had they remained inside the barns or beneath the cottages when the earth broke apart? The story could have ended in tragedy. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the broken fences in shades of crimson and gold, the farmers sat together in the fields. They shared bread, water, and silence. No one laughed. No one spoke carelessly. All felt the same unspoken truth weighing on them. They owed their safety, perhaps their very lives, to Rowan. And as the horse stood nearby, head lowered but still alert, his mane stirring in the soft wind, they began to see him not just as a beast of burden, but as a protector. From that day forward, Rowan would no longer be remembered simply as a horse of the valley. He had become the animal who listened to the earth when no one else could and saved them all. The days that followed the earthquake were filled with repair and reflection. The farmers mended fences, patched cracked walls, and gathered the broken pieces of their lives. The valley bore scars now, deep cracks along the soil, tilted posts, and barns that leaned ever so slightly from the quake's strength. But the people themselves remained whole, and with every task they carried out, their thoughts returned to the chestnut horse whose restless hooves had warned them. Rowan was different now in their eyes. He had always been valued for his strength and steadiness, but after that day, the farmers treated him with a reverence usually reserved for saints or heroes. Children who once rode him with carefree laughter now approached him slowly, wide-eyed, running their hands along his mane as though touching a living miracle. Mothers whispered to their little ones, "This is the horse who saved us," and the children listened, their gazes filled with wonder. At evening meals, when families gathered around wooden tables, the tale was told and retold. "He stomped the ground before it began," Elias would recount, his voice steady, though his eyes still carried the memory of fear. "The earth was silent to us, but not to him. He heard it coming." Younger farmers nodded solemnly, humbled by how close they had come to disaster. The story spread beyond the valley. Visitors to the market in the nearby town carried it with them, speaking of the animal who had felt the quake before any man. Soon, Rowan was no longer just a workhorse. He was called the guardian of the valley. Travelers asked to see him, children begged to feed him apples, and elders nodded in respect whenever he passed. Rowan himself did not change. He still pulled the plows, carried the children, and grazed peacefully in the pasture. Yet, there was a gravity in him now, as though he carried not only the weight of harnesses and carts, but also the trust and gratitude of an entire community. The quake faded into memory, but Rowan's warning lived on in the hearts of the people. In the winter, when the families sat by the fire, the story was told again, woven into the fabric of their traditions. In the spring, when the earth trembled faintly with storms and rains, the farmers would glance toward Rowan, watching his ears, his stance, his restless hooves, as if he were their living barometer of fate. Years later, long after the cracks in the soil had been filled and the barns rebuilt, the tale remained. Children who had been too young to remember the quake themselves told it to their own children. They described the afternoon sun, the sudden stillness of the air, and the horse whose nervous stomping echoed louder than words. It became more than a memory. It became a legend of survival, of the bond between man and beast, of the truth that nature speaks through its creatures if only we learn to listen. And so, in that quiet valley, the name of Rowan was remembered not as that of a mere horse, but as a protector who heard the whispers of the earth before disaster struck. His warning became a story told for generations, the tale of how, one quiet afternoon, a horse saved an entire community simply by listening to what lay beneath the soil.